Welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm here in the Nucleus studio in the Content Hub located in Coconut Grove, Miami. I am excited for this show today. I'm excited to be back in the chair talking to you about important issues that are impacting your businesses, your community associations, or you as an individual, whether it's insurance related, business, or real estate. We have the information you can use, and that's what this broadcast is about. Every single week, we've been doing this consistently, week in and week out, to make sure that you have the information you need. We are in the midst of a crazy storm season. It got a little quiet there after some hectic situation with Hurricane Beryl and other storms that are impacting both our area as well as other hemispheres of the world here. So we want to make sure that we continue to keep our finger and our attention, finger on the pulse and attention to the tropics, to making sure that you are prepared. You are prepared in the event that something happens. Consistency and persistence is the absolute game changer when it comes to insurance, whether it's placing insurance or recover from loss. We preach it here. It's our mantra at GlobalPro. We want to make sure that you're doing the same when it comes to your preparation and your recovery efforts, and whether you're rebuilding. Consistency and persistence. Joining me today is our very own Rob Bowlby. I want to bring him quickly on here. Rob, how you doing out there in Texas?
As you mentioned, we've had a very active storm season, a little more active in Texas than Florida so far, which is rare. But yeah, we're doing great out here.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the Mother Nature and these natural catastrophes, Texas seems to be ripe with opportunity when it comes to dealing with these claims and everything in between, contractors at large. So, but Florida isn't without its issue. The Carolinas, as well as our markets in New York, we're definitely seeing an uptick in natural disasters. I mean, I think the numbers are. We're going to run through a few things here with Rob this morning. We're going to talk about your top statistics for the 2024 storm season. We're going to hit on key points, things we've learned already from Hurricane Beryl. Hurricane Beryl, by the numbers. He's going to run you through some amazing statistics that definitely you need to be aware of, because it was a very early storm, a very big and very strong storm. So it sets the mood for what's to come. When I say mood, it's the mood of these insurance companies and dealing with them, because we're talking about your interest here. And then we're going to wrap it up with really what's going on the ground, boots on the ground, the complaints that are coming out with consumers. I mean, at large, it is not a good situation. But before we jump into that, Rob, let's talk about 2024, what it's made up to be. I'm gonna kick it off with a couple stats, and then you can fill in some of these numbers, right? Predicted named storms, right? So for 2024 storm season, expecting 17 to 25 named storms. Now that prediction was increased because of Hurricane Beryl and some of the activity that we saw early on. So they're expecting 8 to 13 named storms, major category storms, right? 4 to 7. That's a category 3 or higher. And there's already some talks about increasing the categories. Right now we cap out at 5, but I think, Rob, you gotta agree with me. Some of these storms seem to be kind of pushing the limits on what we think a 5 is these days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we have sea surface temperatures, a rise in the temperature. It's above average. We all know about that. El Nino, La Nino. These things kind of, confuse people. La Nina. Let me correct myself there, right? So it's a transition between the two and what that means to the reporting or predictions from Colorado universities and others. There's some forecast models, right? New models like the modular ocean model and the SDCON are being used to improve hurricane intensity predictions. Not so much the path, but the intensity of them. I did do a deep dive on this stuff once I saw it come up in my own research and to understand what it is. I mean, they are literally looking at the levels in the storm and where they're impacting it from 0 to 4 stories roughly and above. And then they're dropping more instrumentation down into these storms. They're flying through the storms more, lower, higher altitudes. They're trying to figure out a little bit more on the intensity predictions. Not so much the path. Some of these storms are so big that they impacted such a wide swath of an area that it really kind of doesn't matter if they deviate left or right, because the intensity of the winds and the rain and the other conditions like hail we saw with Beryl are so far outside of the eye. It's really important to understand the intensity thing and preparedness enhancements. I think everyone is screaming and yelling about preparedness, we talk about it all the time. I just heard me mention persistence and consistency. I think that's most important when you're talking about it. We all kind of have our top 10 list of things that we do as far as what we tell or what we are practicing as far as preparedness. So, some statistics on a storm. Rob, take us through the key points on Hurricane Beryl.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Dan. And one thing I do want to touch on the right beforehand, because you said it a few times in your opening comments there about a named storm, and so until I got into this business, I was wondering why you cared. Like, why do you care if we name a storm or not? That just kind of means maybe it's bigger, it plays a little better in the media if you have a name, if you name for a storm. But which I know you know, but what we start to see in a lot of commercial policies is the policies handle a named storm differently than they do just regular damage from wind or water or anything like that, to the point where you can have different deductibles for a named storm, you can have different methods of payment for a named storm. So when you're buying particularly commercial insurance, I think that's something really important to discuss with your agent. What happens with this policy if my property is involved with a named storm? Because it's not always the same as if it's just a normal wind or water damage claim.
Absolutely, really
But
great point. Great point, Rob. I mean,
yeah,
seriously, you hit that one home for sure. Yeah.
But to your point on Beryl, so Beryl became a Category 1 hurricane, which, Category 1 relative to 5 doesn't sound that bad, but still 80-mile-per-hour winds were sustained at Hobby Airport. I think it got up to 111 at Houston Bush International Airport. It got up to about 107, made landfall near Matagorda, Texas, and then downgraded.
You froze up
You
there.
know, probably the biggest, we did a lot of things in Texas. Keeping the power on is not one of them, unfortunately. We saw that in the 2001 freeze. And if you live here, it's about this time every year that you start get warnings about ERCOT and the power grid as everybody cranks up their air conditioning as we get into the 107-degree temperatures. But we had a major power outage as an aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. And we had people in Houston, hundreds of thousands of people, initially millions without power. But then as it continued to drop, what was surprising was you were 7, 10 days out from the storm and you still had hundreds of thousands of people without power. So it kind of not a huge power impact when it hit landfall, but a lot of long trailing aftermath on that. Detailed damage assessments are still ongoing, but again, notable for heavy rainfall, high winds, and just the people living without power for days at a time afterwards.
Let Rob, sticking to that. I mean, what does that mean for the businesses that are without power? I mean, how any sort of do's and don'ts with regards to making claims and what they should be looking for without this power? I mean, you did have a storm, right? So you get connected to something. You may have sustained physical damage, which sometimes is a requirement in order to make a claim for loss of income if you got shut down because you have no power. What are some of the pitfalls, things that these our business owners should be looking out for?
So a couple of things to look out for. One, my experience with the carriers is they get real focused on property damage, and income loss is almost always an afterthought. So one thing we always do when we sign up a claim is push for that business income immediately, because that's, as you know, as we all know, we're entrepreneurs. It's the lifeblood of any business, whether it's a small business or a large corporation. If you don't have income coming in, you've got to be able to pay people. And so the first thing we do is ask for the business income, even if it can't be calculated in a quick basis. You can go ahead and get to the carrier and say, hey, it's going to be at least this amount. Let's go ahead and get an advance on that, and we'll settle it up on the back end. But we push really hard to get people's business income flowing back into the business as quickly after a storm as possible. The other thing is kind of going back to being prepared. Just have good record keeping. I mean, all of the carriers are going to outsource this. Very few, if any, do this type of analysis internally. That's why you want to have an advocate to do an independent analysis for you. But make sure you've got last year's financial information ready. Make sure you've got your payroll records ready. Make sure you know how much inventory you had on hand. Make sure you've got year-to-date statements, even if they're just a QuickBooks statement or something prepared by your in-house staff. That's what the carrier needs that calculation, and you need an advocate to calculate so that income can continue to flow into your business.
No, it makes a lot of sense here. Now we transition into claims. So, what are we looking at as far as economic losses? You are boots on the ground. You guys are seeing this stuff, handling the claims, economic losses. What's being reported as far as in those local markets as far as the economic damages and the types of claims that are being made.
So, and again, these are all estimates at this point. It's still early, but net loss in Texas output is estimated at about $2 billion. Total insurable losses for Hurricane Beryl is between 1.5 and 2.5 billion across the U.S. Um, Insurable losses in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands was 400 to 700 million of that. In Texas, residential property damage, they're expecting claims of approximately 1.2 million with estimated value of 10 billion. Commercial property damage, about a half million in claims with an estimated value of 8 billion. And then beyond that, 300,000 in auto damage claims, estimated value of 3 billion, 400,000 in flood damage, and then 200,000 in power outage and infrastructure damage. I think that number is probably a little bit low. Um,
I'm going to guess that.
and you know
I'm
what?
going to agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and you know what? One thing we always talk about. This is why advocacy is so important when you have a hurricane, and you guys see hurricanes a lot more frequently than we do. But there's big differences between wind damage and water damage or flood damage. And so the carriers instinctively will try to push as much damage toward flood damage as possible, which is either not covered or covered by the $250,000 FEMA limit. But their point is it's not theirs to pay out. And so that's why you need somebody that can get in there and differentiate between flood damage and wind damage to really help properly prepare the claim to get the insurance company to pay it.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think these estimates, again, as you noted, it is an estimate, and what we have seen is that they're at this early in the stage, just like the reportings of the conditions in the storm itself are wrong. And they're going to be corrected and updated. And well, let me take that back. They're not that they're wrong; they're just early predictions. And as we gather more information in the industry, whether it's on claims and claims are made, people return to properties that they evacuated, or the lights turn on and you got to get back to business, right? So you don't have all the time in the world to dedicate to making your claim, right? So then you finally make your claim, you submit the proofs of loss, submit the estimates. The contractors are, pulling their hair out because they have too many jobs to take, but they say yes to everyone, and it takes them a while to get their invoicing in. So these things take some time. So these numbers will adjust as will the conditions as they were reported in the actual storm itself. A great one, to kind of point to is like Hurricane Michael. The estimation on the actual physical damages and the claims that are being reported was completely different a year and a half later. In fact, they upgraded this storm from a mild category 4. It's kind of hard to use the word mild, but I will. Let's get a low category 4 to a high category 5 when they started analyzing not only the conditions of the storm, but actual evidence they found at properties where the types of damages they were seeing couldn't possibly have been caused by a category 4, had to have been something significantly greater. And it wasn't a tornado because it wasn't, they didn't have the meteorology, vector diagrams, and everything else to be able to prove that there was a tornado. So they would assume that it's from the storm itself. But again, really important information here. Now, these are big numbers, regardless of whether or not they're right, wrong, or going to be updated, right? But there's a lot of complaining going on the ground there, right, Rob? Take us through some of the things that you're hearing from some of the policyholders to the lawyers to the legislators, and the media and the news alike. What are some of the issues? I think honestly, I've done my own reading, and then needless to say, nothing terribly unique to this, but this was an early storm in the season, right? An unusually early storm. It set a record for it. So if these are the complaints today, and we haven't had really much of anything since it, if these storms start to pile up at the end of the season, like we typically see, be aware. You need representation. So, Rob, walk us through some of the things that you're seeing and hearing, and some of the things that our audience needs to be aware of.
Sure, and one thing to keep in mind is Texas. Hurricane Beryl has gotten all of the press on this, but about 2 weeks before that, North Texas got hit by 86 mile per hour winds. Depending on where you were, the lowest I've seen, we use hail trace to pull storm data anytime we do a claim, and so the lowest I've seen on this May 27th, May 28th date was 73 miles per hour. The highest I've seen is about 86, 87 miles per hour. And that in and of itself resulted in tens of thousands of claims in North Texas before Beryl even struck.
But
And so
but
all
hey,
of the
Rob,
Texas.
let me pause you right there though. But and I want to point out, just because that was an amazing thought, and I wasn't even
Yeah.
anticipating you saying this, but like the big difference there, right? Because of the type of claim, deductibles, the
Yep.
way in which it's reported, a wind other wind, or a wind storm that's not a named storm. Is definitely something for our audience to keep in mind as they're dealing with their claims. So if you had something in North Texas that occurred prior to Beryl, it's really important that you distinguish between the two and don't just think that because it was a hurricane, it's better to make the claim. In fact, it financially, at the end of the day, that's what your insurance is there to make you whole financially. It's not in your
Yep.
interest. So,
Yep, you're exactly right. And so we've seen, even prior to Burrow, we saw just, the things just got a lot weirder with the carriers, mainly because we believe they were just overstretched with not having enough staff to handle the sheer number of claims. So before, when you'd report a claim, you generally get an adjuster from the carrier out there within a week. We're hearing people coming out 3-4 weeks later, and no showing. We're seeing the major carriers start to hire more IAs. A lot of times if you're dealing with Allstate or State Farm, generally you get a State Farm or Allstate employee in North Texas. I know that's not true in every market, but we've got big State Farm headquarters here. Allstate has a huge presence in North Texas, and same thing with Farmers. You're generally probably 49 times out of 50 getting a staff adjuster to come out and adjust the claim. Now, even with Allstate, Farmers, and State Farm, we're seeing third-party adjusters come out. And we had one yesterday where the guy said Hancock came out and wrote an estimate, but then the carrier told me he just never sent the estimate in. So we're seeing all kinds of weird stuff. We're hearing weird stuff. We heard something from a different carrier this week that the carrier told them there, we sent in all the moisture readings, we sent in the visible evidence of the floor buckling, and they said, well, before we can do anything, we need to wait 30 days for the floor to dry out before we will let any mitigation be done, before we'll agree to pay any estimate. And you could tell it was just an inexperienced person of the carrier. Nobody that works for a carrier would tell you to let your floor sit wet for 30 days and hope that it would dry out. But you're just seeing a lot of that weird stuff right now. So you definitely see some delays in claim processing, underpayment of claims. Yeah, to me, that's not much different. I mean, we see claims consistently underpaid, storm or no storm. We're seeing more denials without proper cause. I mean, we had a dock that got affected by wind over in the lake area. The carrier denied it, and the adjuster never set foot on the dock because the way to get to the dock had a little bit of water on it. He said, well, there's too much liability. I can't walk on that dock. And then he denied it and said the damage was caused by waves instead of wind. Even though it's a rigid dock, it's not a floating dock. So it'd be really hard for waves on a lake to do damage to the roof of a dock. So just kind of little weird stuff like that we haven't
yeah,
seen.
I'm,
So I
I'm
guess
getting
I would.
I'm getting Superstorm Sandy deja vu. That was 2012,
Yeah.
and that was we had some interesting because they built those like boathouses on the dock, and every insurance company was determined to deny those claims. So that's interesting that your experience. I mean, it's definitely something to look out for. Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And we're starting to see something I've never seen before as the carrier's technology has improved. They're asking the insured as they report the claim to just take photos and upload them into the portal. And we've had one where we signed up this week where the client got denied with no inspection. They looked at the client's photos that were uploaded in the portal and said, we're not paying that claim. So lots of kind of weirder stuff. There's other things to be on the lookout for, contractor scams. Anytime there's a storm somewhere, a lot of people show up from out of town, on both sides of the equation. So contractors come up from out of town to try to make a quick buck. They may or may not be licensed in that state. They may or not be reputable contractors. But then you see the same thing with the carriers. They'll bring in CAT adjusters from out of state that don't know anything about Texas or Texas weather or the way houses are built in Texas. And so you kind of see that on both sides.
Not really. And then they don't update their pricing sheets. So they're using, maybe they're from Oklahoma and they don't want to pay the
Yep.
license to, one of the software companies or whatever it may be, or they just forget to do it. And they use something outdated, or they are, let's say, a contractor. And when a storm hits, suddenly they're stormtroopers. So they fly in to make a quick buck, like you mentioned, not from a contractor standpoint, but as an adjuster. And now they're in construction in, let's say, Kansas or some other market that's not Houston, and the prices are extraordinarily different. The cost of labor is very different, and the style in which or the approach to the construction is in fact different. So, and also too, last time I checked, I don't remember a hurricane hitting anywhere really in the Midwest. So again, these guys don't quite understand, although they do experience tornadoes and hail. Again, tropical systems are very different. They bring lots of different characteristics to and weather to the area. That's felt long after they leave. Tornadoes don't cause flooding, so there's complexity in distinguishing between flood versus wind, flying debris. There's sometimes hail, as we've mentioned. North Texas, where you're sitting in Dallas, you certainly get it all. You get the trailing storms off the Gulf. You get the hailstorms and the tornadoes. You get extreme weather moving through the Gulf Stream. So you got to be ready. You got to be prepared. This has been a great conversation, Rob. Again, we always tell everyone, make sure that you go online, check us out online at GlobalPro.com. Get in contact with Rob's team. They're there in Texas, boots on the ground, working with policyholders, working with insurance companies, lawyers. They're very active in the community, whether it's trade organizations like Tapia or commercial real estate. They're making sure that they understand the changes and fluctuations in the market. A lot of what we've seen in the price of insurance and things like that is market driven. It's not driven by claims themselves. So it's very important to understand how those market conditions may impact your claims or the cost of your insurance and the coverages that's afforded to you. So we are on the front lines, both on the real estate side as well as business and insurance, to make sure that we're connecting the dots, making sure that you are getting the most out of your insurance. So that's why it's really, really important that you tune into our broadcast every Thursday at 11 o'clock. We go live here Eastern Standard Time on the Recovery Report. Rob, thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate the advice, the information, and the candor when it comes to some of the interesting things you're starting to see out there.
Thanks, Dan. It's always good to be with you.
Well, guys, I'm again really happy to have had Rob here. Our entire team is incredibly grateful for the opportunity to represent you, whether it's Florida, Texas, or anywhere else in the world. Just know that GlobalPro can be there to help you. We can help you with your placing of insurance. We can help you recovering loss. We're also rolling out inspection services, and we're going to have our very own Matt Sangsbury on next week to talk all about that. There's a really important deadline that's approaching here in Florida that most community associations and residential type buildings are unaware of. And it's really important that you take advantage of these new services we're rolling out, because we're much more than just an insurance adjusting firm or a consulting firm. We are an insurance services firm that, again, may want to make sure that you're ready, that you're going to recover, and that you're able to rebuild. We do it all here as it relates to insurance, and we want to make sure that you have what you need in the time of need. So make sure that you tune in next week right here at 11 o'clock when Matt Sangsbury joins me to talk about this really important issue impacting Florida residents. Again, thanks to Rob and the team in Texas. Keep doing what you're doing. By the way, next week, I will be actually in Texas. I'm looking forward to it, to joining the team, catching up with them, seeing what's going on. It's going to be an awesome trip. I'm really much looking forward to it. So again, see you same time, same place, right here on the Recovery Report Live.